welcome to Purple Daily. And for the first time in show history, because we launched this a few months ago in the offseason, we get to break down a real-life football game that mattered and counted. And to help me do that for the first hour of the show, former NFL quarterback, the journeyman correspondent for us here, Sage Rosenfels. What is up, Sage?
Good afternoon, Matthew. Always nice to talk about the Vikings on a victory Monday. So, not a bad start, and 8 of 10, 10 passes. You don't see that very often in an NFL football game, but I think all Vikings fans would say that was a beautiful win. That was a beautiful Mike Zimmer coached football team out there on Sunday.
80% completion percentage for the quarterback, a 140 rating. So Kirk Cousins doesn't have too much to be upset about. Sage, you once won a game while playing for Gary Kubiak in which you threw a total of 18 passes for 128 yards, and your team won 42-28. So how does it feel as the quarterback when you don't throw the ball a lot, but you win anyway?
So I believe you're talking about a start out in Oakland, California. We didn't have to throw a ball a ton that game. We run the ball fairly well, got a couple turnovers. But I'll even one-up you on that. I believe the year before that or 2 years before that, I was backing up David Carr down in Houston, and I had gotten injured, actually. I broke my wrist earlier in the year, so I was on IR. But they went out to Oakland, and we had I think we had 32 yards passing. We had like 38 yards in sacks. And so I believe we had like -5 yards passing total, and we won the game. They turned the ball over a couple times, and Ron Dane, I think, was our running back, the old Wisconsin Badger, and we just sort of like, let's just not screw this thing up. And the Vikings got that lead the other day, and just sort of sat on this Atlanta Falcons team, and we saw what a difference, by the way. 1 year, of course, it's Atlanta, doesn't have a great defense, doesn't stop the run all that great, but the way they ran the football yesterday, that was a big difference between this year and last year.
So you had a win where you threw 18 against Jacksonville, 19 was against Oakland, and both of those were victories with Houston. So
Jacksonville, that's right. Well, I had a Raiders game. I feel like maybe I threw 20 passes.
Yeah, it was 19
much more,
yep.
But it was that was a Monday night game. So that was like, again, we caught the lead, and it was like, all right, Sage, let's not screw this thing up. And so we played pretty conservative, and their quarterback didn't play very well that night. Our defense played well, and I got to win with 18 attempts. Still threw an interception, of course.
So really interesting for me, Sage. I started looking through the Pro Football Focus grades right before we were going on, because they will grade the game and then they'll post it, and then they'll change the grades a little bit based on the All-22 film that comes out. So their first grading of this game found the offensive lineman to just be okay, but for Dalvin Cook to be fantastic, as you might expect, running over 100 yards, breaking big plays. And I think it's a combination of, if the offensive line does just enough, and the scheme from Rick Dennison, who is the run game coordinator, is as good as it's usually been for him, combined with the elite talent of Dalvin Cook, who had as much burst as I've ever seen from him yesterday, they can do this a lot. And I'm not saying 10 passes, but they can do this a lot where they consistently break explosive plays, runs over 10 yards. And we even saw Alexander Madison come up with a 17-yard run yesterday. And I think a lot of it was just play design, that they mixed different types of schemes. It wasn't all one type of run scheme, like they talked about running a lot of zone stuff. The 21-yard touchdown or 19-yard touchdown was a power scheme. So it was interesting to me that there were a lot of different things that the Vikings in the running game threw at Atlanta yesterday.
And for the fans listening at home, a power scheme would be more of a sort of double team or some down blocks with generally a guard pulling around, sort of like a counter, but only one person pulling. And so, that obviously very different than the zone, inside-outside zone scheme of Rick Dennison and Gary Kubiak and Kevin Stefanski, which worked very well in that game. And I always thought in that offense, in that style of offense, that outside zone scheme, it seemed like when, back the days of Mike Shanahan at Denver, when Kubiak was in Denver, they never had great backs. Obviously they had what's his face, who's in the Hall of Fame. The running back that was in the Hall of Fame, that was fantastic. I can't think of his name off the top of my head. Terrell Davis. Jeez, how can I remember him? So, but after that, it was like, they would take these guys in the 7th round or undrafted, or, Mike Anderson would run for 1,200 yards. And it was like, who are these guys?
Olandis Gary. Yep.
Yeah, all these guys. And they would regularly churn out these 1,000-yard seasons by basically unknown backs. Then in Houston, Arian Foster, he was after me, but he was pretty much an unknown guy, I believe undrafted or 7th rounder. and he led the NFL in rushing a year or two. I think he had over 1,500 yards. So I always thought if this system actually had a premier back, like I thought to myself, Adrian Peterson when I came to Minnesota from Houston, man, if Adrian could have been in that style of system where, Ron Dane somehow ran for 700 yards last year, what would Adrian run for? Well, Dalvin Cook is that guy in a sense of like, man, he is explosive. And when you see that sort of north south running style where it's not, the jitterbug deal, this offense is, those outside zone schemes are you're starting your line, and when you see that hole, you cut up, and Madison did a great job as well. And man, Dalvin Cook explodes through that line and sort of around the end a lot of times and just outruns any sort of pursuit where it might have been a tackle for a 7-yard gain by somebody else, and he's taking it for 25. I don't think there's been this explosive of a running back that I've seen in a while, in particular in this style of offense. This guy can go to the house at any moment. And the question is, he's a Porsche, he's a Lamborghini, he's not a Jeep. And the question is, can he stay healthy for, the vast majority of this season? That would be huge for the Vikings.
So here's my question for you, Sage. I want to put this out on a Twitter poll. Can the Vikings use the style of offense that they had yesterday? And I am not suggesting that they throw 10 passes. They're not Army, right? I mean, I would guess throughout the season, they will throw a lot more than 10 in a lot of games. But I was even going back through 2017 and looking at Case Keenum and the number of games where he threw for 160 yards, 150 yards, and they got wins. I could think of 3 or 4 right off the top of my head that they were able to do this. So it's not like a Mike Zimmer team has never used running, conservative quarterback play, hit a few passes down the field like the touchdown from Kirk Cousins to Adam Thielen, and then play great defense. So my question for you, Sage, is can this keep working? I mean, this was the style that Mike Zimmer came in this year and said, this is what I want Mike Zimmer football to be. And if it doesn't work, well, at least it was mine. At least it wasn't John DeFilippo running 40 passes out of the shotgun constantly, right? Can they be a great team if they play this way?
Well, yes, I do believe so. But I also think this, if Mike Zimmer had Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, I think he'd want to open it up, right?
Yeah,
I think he
agree.
does understand, it's not like, you have to, like Mike Ditka back in there was only one way to win the Chicago Bears back in the 80s. There wasn't like, well, all of a sudden Dan Marino showed up. They probably would have been to hand the ball off to Peyton anyway. So I don't think Mike Zimmer's hard-headed like that, but I just truly believes that he feels with this quarterback, with this offensive line, with that combination of the defense and the 2 really good receivers that we have, and just that, the type of backs that they have, like this is the style more often than not that's going to win us more games than not. And, the defensive style, this sort of slow it down attack, huddle up, sort of the anti Texas Tech or Cliff Kingsbury now at the Arizona Cardinals, is a slow it down game. And the thing about it is, you can slow down the other good offenses too, and you keep a lot of games close. When everyone only has 9 or 10 possessions in a football game versus 15 or 16, those games are always more low scoring. They are a lot of times 7-point games or maybe a field goal game. And he believes if he gets a lot of those games, they will win a lot. Probably a lot based off of the fact that he thinks at the end of the day, his defense will make a lot of those plays. And man, they played excellent yesterday. This Atlanta Falcons offense and this passing attack, they were top 3-4 in the NFL last year. Matt Ryan threw for a gazillion yards, I think 4,900 yards or something like, 35 touchdowns. He had a great year last year. And, this defense played phenomenal in its first test. Got the special teams blocked field goal. I mean, that was, again, that was the blueprint for how you'd like to win a football game, knowing, there's probably going to be games where Kirk has to throw the ball 40 times this year, and that's just the way it's going to be. But more often than not, if they can have more of this style, I think he sees that as a playoff caliber football team that will be very tough to beat in the playoffs.
So I want to get into the defense in just a minute, Sage, but to stick with the offensive side, Kirk Cousins did get hit a couple times on very few dropbacks. And in terms of the PFF numbers, he was pressured on about half of his dropbacks. And some of them, one, there was a great move by Grady Jarrett to go right by Pat Elflein and strip sack Kirk. It didn't end up turning into a huge thing because the Vikings fell on it. Last year, someone would have picked that up and run it into the end zone for sure for
Yeah.
Atlanta, but just the way the ball bounced, the Vikings catch a little bit of a break there. And even on the touchdown throw, he does a little bit of a shuffle forward and there's guys falling at his feet. He still makes a really great throw to Adam Thielen. But what I saw from the pass protection was this doesn't look very good when he's got to just take the ball back and make a throw rather than being able to use play action and things like that. So if you were going to nitpick at one thing from yesterday, I actually don't think that the offensive line looked particularly good against a team that really has just one good player up there. And now they've got to go to Green Bay. And then in 2 weeks, you've got Chicago. So I think that what Mike Zimmer said today, which is there's a lot of things to still clean up. In the pass protection, the few times that they did pass protect, did a very poor job. And they're going to have to be a lot better than that because I don't suspect that they'll get a punt block and interception and then the game will be over by the end of the first quarter, essentially. I think as going forward, that's something that we just didn't find out really, aside from a handful of snaps, that I still think is going to be worth watching quite a bit because I don't think Kirk Cousins is throwing 10 passes ever again.
Well, if you're going to write a grade for every position, every player of how it went yesterday, in particular position groups, you'd like to. I think the offensive line was probably the worst. I'd give them an A for running the football, but in pass protection, it wasn't very good. And they somewhere on straight drop back. Elflein got beat up a couple times. And, the guy crossing him was a stud. Bradbury got pushed back a couple times, and I've seen that some in the preseason. That is one thing that concerns me with him. It seems like a guy who is tough and he could run and can create good leverage, but he's not a bigger guy. And this style, so that has been the negative. If you ask around the league and people who have different styles of offenses and what they believe in, maybe a more power-focused team with the guards pulling double teams, the big offensive line teams, pass protection in this zone scheme. Yes, you have these guys who historically have been on the smaller side of offensive linemen, 295 to 300 rather than 310 and 320 and 330. But they can run. And that's the whole point, is that these guys can run in that zone game. They're quick. They can a lot of times get a guy cut off and get a cut block or create some sort of seam by their quickness and movement. But in straight drop back protection, that is where they struggle. And they always sort of have. And that can be a problem. That's why Dwayne Brown was so important for the Texans, and then going to the Seattle Seahawks as their left tackle and has been a stud, is that he is a guy that can run, but he's also big enough and does a pretty good job with straight pass protection. So it's in particular the toughest, sometimes that left tackle spot. And then those interior guys, if you have a head up nose guard right on you, and you've got a 290-pound center, that is a tough, thing to do, protect for 7-step drop and, 4 or 5 seconds in the pocket. So, Kirk does not get the ball off super quick. And I think they try to find ways to minimize, this issue. I think they know it's an issue. They've been seeing it all training camp. I'm guessing that starting defensive line, could beat up that offensive line pretty good, in particular in pass pro stuff. So believe me, Kevin Stefanski and the crew this is something that they're always going to try to improve, maybe try a different player at some point, try to do the best with the guys they have, but also game plan and try to create various pass plays, not just drop back, but the bootleg stuff, the play action stuff, the screens. We saw a little bit of it all yesterday, and that helps with a leaky pass protection.
The one screen that you mentioned to Kyle Rudolph, it ended up coming back because of a holding, but it was a clever play design, and Kyle Rudolph got in some space and ran after the catches. Like, well, that's one thing the defense won't see coming, is a screen pass to Rudolph, and then he's got a bunch of room. And there was some creativity even in those couple of pass plays that, if you're Kevin Stefanski and Gary Kubiak, you're kind of thrilled that you didn't have to really show your cards. So now you go into Green Bay having only run 14 total attempts to pass. So that includes even with your penalties that brought them back, like pass blocking type of snaps. But the concern would be, you mentioned Garrett Bradbury had a tough day. Well, you're right on that. And I've never seen this before, but small samples create weird stats. He got a pass blocking grade of 0 by Pro Football Focus. Like, it went so poorly for him yesterday that he got a 0. And the lowest I'd ever seen before, it's a 1 to 100 scale, was a 7, and that was Tom Compton against Aaron Donald. So what that tells you is that almost every snap that was pass blocking for Garrett Bradbury went badly for him against Atlanta. And now it's going to be Green Bay, and they've got Zadarius Smith, and they've got Kenny Clark, and they've got beasts and a lot better of a defense. So there is something that does need to be improved for sure for next week, and it's that. And maybe Garrett Bradbury going into his second week, now that he's got his feet wet a little bit, will improve there. So let's take a break.
That is something that you don't see a lot in the preseason. But we did see on some drop back stuff, Garrett struggled, and said he's a rookie. It's first time he's doing it. It seems like in the running game, they're all doing a heck of a job, obviously through this through 1 week. But that's going to be a major challenge. And so, those little things like that screen to Rudolph, I believe it was a illegal block in the back, but it was sort of a bang bang play. And the thing about that play is that is sort of the we talk about this sort of bootleg and play action stuff. We've talked about a million times, but that is the weakest spot of the offense in pass protection is the tight end. The tight end has to block a great pass rushing defensive end, a Danielle Hunter type player all by themselves. The tackle has to come down to start run. Then they sometimes come back and try to help out at the end, but that tight end is left on an island with a premier pass rusher. So what do? You actually have him lose. Then you throw the screen and you're off and running, right? So it's sort of like, hey, if you're going to come after us, big time and rush the tight end, we'll throw a screen out that tight end. So it's sort of the, back and forth game, that the strategy game that, again, and you don't have to be an amazing running tight end to make that happen. It's really about, Jim Kleinsasser was great at that. He was a great salesman. The only thing that didn't sell well is because he was always such a good blocker, like no way would you get beat, right? So, those are the different ways that this offense is going to try to make up for some of those deficiencies currently in the drop back passing game.
Well, dare I be impolite by saying Kyle Rudolph doesn't have that problem that defenders would say, wait, you're too good of a blocker, I couldn't beat you. Anyway, so vote on the poll. Can the Vikings win the way they did on Sunday on a weekly basis and win the NFC North? Right now, split right down the middle. 52% saying yes, 48% no. We'll continue to discuss it. Want to talk about the defensive side when we come back. We've got Sage Rosenfels, Matthew Coller reacting to a 28-12 win by the Minnesota Vikings over the Atlanta Falcons yesterday, and already dipping our toe a little bit in those Green Bay waters. So we'll continue to discuss as we go forward. Take a quick break. Be right back